We know being a marginalized nonprofit leader is not for the faint of heart. There are internal and external factors that make navigating the workplace particularly tricky for us. And after watching the slides, I hope that you have a better understanding of what it is you're navigating so that you don't get caught up with a little water in your mouth. I think it's really important for us to have a good sense of the terrain that we're navigating, and I'm going to give you some tools and some strategies in order for you to navigate that in a way where you don't let what's happening around you get. So who am I? Who are you learning from today? My name is Petra Vega. I am an anti-oppressive leadership coach, specifically for BIPOC and LGBTQ+ nonprofit leaders who really want to embrace their identity and ideas. They really want to spark meaningful change, and they really want to reclaim their voice, even when self-doubt may be getting in the way. All right, so what are we doing today? Today, I really want to support you in getting a better sense of what are the nonprofit waters that you are navigating, because I really think it's important for us to not gaslight ourselves. There are probably things that you feel are not quite right at your nonprofit, which is how you found this video. And I think one of the things that can be not quite right around some of the nonprofits that we're navigating as marginalized nonprofit leaders is that our nonprofits can feel like battlegrounds, places for us to really beef and be frustrated, and to engage in uphill battles, it feels like sometimes. And I want to offer an alternative to that, which I describe as a playground. And then the last thing I want to do is to help you really be able to resist drowning in those waters. Again, you're probably like feeling the pressure of some of the things that you're navigating, and I want to help you navigate that a little bit better through introducing you to a framework, this play framework that I've created. And the one thing that I would encourage you to do right now, if you haven't already, is to grab the Nonprofit Disruptor Survival Toolkit. You can scan the QR code on the screen, and that will take you immediately to that free resource. In this guide, I really give you 5 tips to help you speak up in the moment and really not hesitate about what you want to say, even if self-doubt may be like really, really loud. So I want to encourage you to get that resource. There are some elements from that research that I'm going to be pulling into today's video. But again, if you're someone who wants to sit with information, really want something for you to kind of do after this video, you're want to grab that. All right. So let's start with, what are we bringing to this work? I think that, oftentimes you may not think about what is I'll call it baggage, for the purpose of a metaphor that I'm going to share in a little bit. I think that there are oftentimes things that we're bringing into work, and sometimes one of the ways that we learn to cope is to compartmentalize, or we try to have our work selves and our life selves, and I just haven't seen that be all that effective for people. And so what I see people are bringing into work, particularly the folks that I work with, is this really big, persistent voice of self-doubt that tells them that you are not capable enough for this. The folks I work with are highly specialized, they are highly skilled, and still internally they feel like they're not up for the challenge. Some of them doubt the reason for why they have these really prestigious roles, or roles with a lot of influence and power. A lot of them, because of their multiple marginalized identities, may feel like, oh, I don't belong here, right? You may not look like the people that you work with, and that can help kind of bring a little life to that belief that you don't belong here. You might be doing some things that are different from them, right? I work with lots of folks who are neurodivergent, and so literally our brains are just constructed in a different kind of way, and that difference can make it seem like the way that you do things is wrong, just because it's different. I also hear that people may feel like, oh, I shouldn't make waves. Like some folks that I work with have had experiences where they have tried to challenge power or try to make change in their organization. And that shit has not gone well. And so they've learned to kind of like, okay, let me not try to ruffle any feathers, even though they really do want something to be different as an organization. They may also experience ideas or narratives around being too much or not enough. And so it's always this idea of like a lack, there's something fundamentally wrong with me. And I think we bring that into our work in ways that we may not always realize or may not be the most helpful. And so I mentioned earlier on, I think that our workplaces can really feel like battlegrounds. They feel like places that we can't bring our full selves. And I've always been so curious about that as someone who's worked in nonprofits for a long, long time. And so I want to introduce to you three patterns that I have seen in working with nonprofit leaders and being someone who works in a nonprofit as well. three different characteristics that I see that we're kind of bringing into the work with us. I think the first one I would describe that we might be packing into our little suitcase, our metaphorical suitcase, is this visual about the report, right? And that the report really has this energy around this. I need this as soon as possible. Sometimes you might work in an organization that needs this yesterday, but it's like, you just told me about this. Like, well, how are you going to tell me you needed it yesterday? But that is the energy, right? And I think when we use a tool like that, the impact of it can really be this big sense of urgency. And so oftentimes I'm working with folks who have this idea that, like, the faster the better. They work in organizations where it's very business as usual, like the world could be ending, people can be having their own personal catastrophes, but like, I still need that report as soon as possible. It's still the energy. Usually in these organizations, there's this idea around, standardization is king, and it's really seen as the most efficient way to communicate and organize information, is this very prescriptive kind of way. And I just think for folks that may be first generation in professional jobs, folks who are immigrants and may not have English as their first language, and other folks who are just generally oral communicators, this kind of workplace characteristic really does not jive well with us, right? And so again, kind of brings life to those self-doubt rooted narratives that I had mentioned earlier. And so I think this is one of the things that I've really seen as a commonality, is this report, I need this as soon as possible energy. And also, again, the impact of this is that there's only one right way, right? And like, oftentimes that one right way is never the way that comes naturally to us. It's never in the way that like looks like us or feels like us. And so again, it's no wonder why we feel friction, and it feels, again, like a battle to go to work sometimes. I think the other element that we see, and you may not work in a super professional setting, but probably you have a workplace that there is like, business casual. There's a particular kind of dress. And so I think when I think about this next element, I think about suits, even if you may not be wearing suits, and that the projection of a suit is kind of like, it's really important to look put together. It's really important for you to have it seem like everything that the fuck is going on, even if you may not, right? And so I just think that the way to describe this suit, right, is that there's a rigidity here. It's very tailored. It's kind of like, just straight edge, and that might not be who you are as a person. I think the idea here too with the resource that it can land around, if we really care about how we look, likely that energy is being encouraged by individualism, right? And if we believe that our ego, our projection upon how other people think about us is so big, we can get into ways of competition that we may not actually want to. We may feel like we need to put people under the bus, or there may be ways that we want to engage passive aggressively, and we may, again, that may not be our intention, but that's kind of like the impact of the energy, where everyone is just trying so hard to stay safe. It's very difficult for people to feel like, oh, I can try something, I can fail at something. And again, I think the piece here is very Western, USA coded around the like, how do I be the best, right? Like, how can I be the top dog in this scenario? And again, if you might have inklings of this, and there might be some friction there, and this might not be you at all, but again, you work in an organization where it feels like that's what you need to do, but that is not how you want to roll. There's tension there. I think the last piece that I see is really this energy that I would describe with a coffee example around, like, I'm just trying to power through the day, right? Like, think about how many people you might talk to who may not say these words, but it's in the spirit of like, same shit, different day, right? I'm just trying to get through. I'm trying to keep my head down. I think this energy is also like really in the neighborhood of like the idea that time is money, that there's a scarcity of time and resources, and we need to be really finite about what's possible in a way that like might not be helpful, right? Like, I think some reasons are definitely finite, but I think again, kind of this one works with the sense of urgency piece of it. It's like there's some stuff that we actually don't need to move that quickly on. And so I think some of this, like, I'm trying to power through the day. Likely, if you're trying to get through the day, you may not like engage in really trying to create generative, deep, nurturing, trust-filled relationships with people, right? And what is the impact of that in your workday, particularly if you're someone that is really relational, right? Maybe you really do care about having relationships. It's not that you have to have besties at work, but like, shit, can I ask about someone's weekend? Or will people look at me funny for even asking that? You know, I just had a session with a client who's doing one-on-ones. They just recently got promoted. They're doing one-on-ones with some of their team members, and folks are like, why do you want to talk to me, right? Like, if that's the energy, people are like, you don't need nothing from me. Why do you want to talk to me? Because I want to get to know you. Like, that is coffee. I'm trying to power through the day. I'm not here to do anything but do the work. And I get it, right? But I think I'm just curious about what the impact of that is for those of us that may not want that in our workplaces. I think this also leads us to get into conflict avoidance, right? Like if we're just trying to move on to the next thing, there might be something that we actually need to tussle with. There might be something that we actually need to ask questions around or get clear on. And that's just going to take time, right? But if we're just trying to jump to the next thing, again, because it's piece around the urgency, we're probably not going to get to having those hard conversations that really are necessary. I think the last piece that I'll say on this one is that I can really see all of these kind of working together in the sense around like, oftentimes we create deadlines that are not at a human's pace, right? And so people are out here like so tired, running themselves ragged. Even though they really care about this work and they want to do a good job, these just feel like all the ingredients to like a really fucked up. I don't really eat a lot of stuff. I'm trying to be like, what would I say, a smoothie, but I don't drink smoothies. Whatever is your food of comfort right now. All of the worst ingredients to make that food. I feel like is what this thing is. I'd love to know in the chat if is there particular energy that you can see that you're either in yourself that you're playing into? Are you playing into this report energy, this suit energy, this coffee energy, or maybe you really see this in your organization? I'm curious, what kind of energy do you really see at your organization? Let me know in the comments. Okay, so while I think this is at the state of the union of our organizations, our nonprofits right now, I know that a lot of folks who get into nonprofits have the best of intentions. People really want to create a change. There is a wrong or injustice in the world that people got into a nonprofit in order to radically dismantle, defund, transform. And so that I want to invite some softening where if you are someone who has played into some of these characteristics, I want to just add like a little softening and a little perspective, because I think even though there are ways that we're showing up that may not be aligned to how we want to be, I think that they still serve a purpose, right? And I imagine that just like a little bit of our intention got out of whack when we first started it. And so when I think about this report energy, right, that like I think our intention was trying to like figure out what's the way that we can like document what we're doing. We want people to be able to like carry the torch, carry the baton to continue this work. We want things to be accessible. Like what is the information that people need to do good work? And so I think really our intention, and we tried to bring organizations was to be organized, to have a system for things. And I think we just went a little bit off kilter. That now it has come that like, oh, if it's not in this particular way, it's wrong, right? Like it has to be written versus there might be other people who there are different learning styles and different communication styles. But I think our intention here was like, I really want to be able to capture what we're doing well. And I think depending on your organization, that intention might not be the impact, right? You know, those things do not sometimes align. I think with the suit, for many of the folks that I work with, even for myself, we really have a desire to feel seen and heard. A lot of us did not grow up in households, do not live in a culture, may not have the relationships that we have that. And so I think we wanted to bring that into our organizations. And what we really wanted was respect. We really wanted someone to see our value and our worth and our contributions. And again, I think we just like a little bit went off kilter that it meant like, oh, we have to dress a particular way. Our hair has to be a particular way. Should our nails or what we buy or like the trinkets on our tables have to be a particular way in order for us to fit in with the rest of everybody? I think we just went a little bit off kilter with that one. But I think what we wanted was like, what does it look like for me to create a space to feel respected and for me to respect other people? I think the last one with like this coffee energy, I think our intention here was really around wanting to be focused. Again, a lot of us care a lot about the work that we're doing. We're really passionate, and I think that can kind of not work well with our desire to change, help, support is so big that we can run ourselves ragged, and those two things can have a wonky relationship to each other. But I think what we really want to do is be focused, right? We want to be intentional. We want to be strategic. We know the work is not easy, but the work is important. And so again, I think that we might have overcorrected with not being able to create space for those relationships, not creating space for conflict, not challenging ourselves to try something different because we're just like so focused on our own papers, right? What I'd love to hear, like, what do you think about some of these intentions, right? And how does it feel for you to consider if you are kind of exhibiting some rapport to or copy energy? What does it shift for you to kind of think about this intention that maybe you started coming out with, but maybe what was happening in your organization started to influence you in a way that you didn't really agree with or appreciate? I'd love to hear about that on the chat. If there's any questions that are coming up, I'd love to hear questions and answer those as well. So if many of our current nonprofits feel like Battlegrounds, I think that necessitates us to then question, what would it require us for it not to feel that way, right? And if the goal is no longer to simply survive our workplaces, what's the energy that we want to tune into? There is my favorite artist, Britt, who has this company called Brachita, created this visual that says, play is the opposite of survival mode, right? And I think there's something so important and special about play, and I really want those of us in organizations that are trying to create a new world, I think we need to play more, right? And so with that in mind, it makes me want to think about, okay, if our organizations were no longer battlegrounds and they were instead places of playground, what might we need to bring with us then in order for us to be good play participants, right? And so I think instead of us bringing that report, that very sanitized, often steeped in white supremacy, very one right way kind of mechanism to document information, I think we might want to swap that report for a zine. If you are not familiar with zines are beautiful, self-published, a curation of ideas, images, sometimes in various mediums. The idea is that this zine is, depending on the zine, might try to communicate one big idea or tiny, smaller ideas, depending on how big the zine is. It's like short for magazine, like an alternative to a magazine. And I think the energy behind a zine is really that the personal is political, right? I think we go into our workplaces, even if the work that we're doing is really centered in identities and marginalization, I think we can lose ourselves in it. And I want to bring us back to our work. And so I think the energy around the zine and bringing the personal political energy, I think the impact, and I've seen the impact in organizations that I have helped to shift the culture. I think the impact here is really the sense of inclusion, right? What would it look like for various ways of communicating to be allowed and encouraged? What would it look like for us to pride ourselves in bringing different perspectives to the table? I can imagine, like, instead of us doing like an annual report at the end of the year, what would it look like to do like a video diary, right? Particularly if the people that you work with are oral communicators, or maybe the communities that you serve are more oral communicators. How do we lean into that instead of trying to pigeonhole people into ways of communicating that doesn't come natural to them? And so I think that would just add a level of complexity that I think we're really capable of, and I think many of us desire more nuance, and we just may not have the proper channels, protocols to kind of get into that, but there's a possibility here. I think instead of us, that should say overalls. I think instead of us swapping, instead of us using this like rigid suit that's tailored to fit and kind of make you a little bit look like everyone else, I imagine what would it look like for us to have something that is a little bit looser fitting, something that you can kind of get dirty in, something that just feels fun. Overall feels fun to me. And I think the energy around overall is that, you know, I'm here to learn and grow, right? This idea that like what I don't know, I can learn, instead of this like fake it till you make it kind of energy. I think overall also give us this invitation to be like authentic as we are. I think, you know, I can imagine what would the metaphor be for us to climb a tree together, right? Like maybe that's not a thing that we do in our organizations. It would be like always stay on the ground, but like maybe the work that we're actually meant to do is up in this tree. We're gonna need to have the right fit, you know, in order for us to get up there. I think there's an invitation here to also just I think breathe from your belly. Like I don't know about you, but suits and that kind of wear feels very constricting. And I think many of us like hold our breath and like our jaws are very tight when we go into some of our workplaces. And I just wonder what is the impact of that long term. And so I wonder what would be if we had more of this overall energy. I think there would be more opportunity for collaboration, right? If I'm not so busy on trying to be the best or being the smartest or being the most interesting or well-read or whatever, I would likely be more susceptible to inviting other people to share ideas with me. I would probably want to be more open to struggle with people around figuring something out. The energy here for me is really like, no one is as smart as all of us. You know, we all have something to bring. And I think that, you know, many of us come into organizations that are really hierarchical and we may not want it to be that way. So I think, you know, creating a culture of learning can really help us share power in that kind of way. I think the last piece is, okay, if we swap coffee with water, there is a emergent strategy principle that says be like water, this idea that's like, how do I flow and be in movement with what is and how the day is going. And just the understanding that change is constant. Things are always changing, right? And it's not that like, okay, I'm only focused on what I'm doing, which is this coffee energy, but more so like, let me step out a little bit. What else is happening around me? What are some things that I could shift? How can I help someone else make a shift? And I think those kinds of orientations will allow us to have much deeper trust in our organizations, where I think the world that we want to create necessitates some of that trust. And I think our organizations can be places for us to practice that if we choose to. Similarly, I think we're really going to need to get better at conflict and managing those kinds of tensions that I think being able to meet the moment and flow through that change can really help us. So I'd love to hear, do you feel like you are tapping into some of the playground energy here, right? Maybe there's ways in which you're trying to communicate that are a little bit different. Maybe there's something about your own with the zine, or maybe there's something about your own self-expression, how you're oriented to people that might be reflective of this overall energy, or maybe you're trying to be more open to you know, go with the changes that might be showing up in your day, instead of fighting against those things with this water energy. Let me know if there's anything that you're tapping into right now, or maybe something that you want to be tapping into. Maybe there's a particular way that you're like, I'm not doing this right now, but I really would like to. I'd love to know that in the comments as well. So, again, we've talked about like, okay, our organizations can feel like Battlegrounds. I am offering an alternative to that from lived experience, from readings and looking at other experiments that people are doing in the world about how workplaces can be sites of creating a different world. As the playground, I think the question now here for us is like, okay, how do we get there, right? And I think before we can get there, I think we really need to wrestle with the fact that a lot of us got into nonprofit work, social change work, in order for us to do freedom work. We're trying to, again, create this new world. There's, again, the wrong that we've seen in the world we want to be different, either because we've been personally affected, someone that we love has been personally affected, or maybe someone you don't even know, and you're just like, that's fucked up. That should not be that way. And so I think the question for me is always, well, then what does our freedom feel like, and how would we know? And so in our research, I have really been compelled by this idea that I think lots of the greats before us have named in different ways. Martin Luther King Jr. said, all meaningful and lasting change begins on the inside. Grace Lee Boggs said, to transform yourself, transform the world. Bell Hooks wrote, the enemy within must be transformed before we can confront the enemy outside. And the way that I came to this idea is that liberation is an inside job. I think there's lots of ways that many of us have entered these workplaces as sites for change making, and I think we forgot to bring ourselves to that change making. And so if you agree with that notion that there is some internal work for you to do as you are engaging with the external work of change making and system change, I want to offer a framework to you to get there. So again, I've been talking to you around play. I think play is a pathway. My liberation looks like a playground. I invite you to think about what your liberation looks like. But I want to offer this approach that you can take today, right now, as you think about, okay, what's the baggage that you're bringing into your workplace, and how might you shift that, right? And maybe this is a practice, a conversation for you and some of your workmates too. That's the invitation here. So play is an acronym. P starts with pause. I really invite you to take a moment to really think about, okay, why did you bring this in your suitcase, right? Like if you brought this coffee energy, if you brought this suit energy, if you brought this report energy, how did this get here, right? Do a little exploration of that. If you haven't already downloaded the Nonprofit Disruptor Survival Guide, one of my first tips is to get a really good sense of like, where does your self-doubt come from, right? And this is really speaking to that, and I have tons of links in that toolkit, so you want to make sure to grab that. It's in the description box as well. But you really need to get a clear sense of like, what made you show up in these kinds of ways, right? And to do it in a way that is really compassionate and understanding is the first step. The next step is that I think you need to make some decisions around what do you want to leave behind? What about what you've been bringing along with you is not working anymore, right? Like stop it, maybe appreciate it for how much it has gotten you to this place, and then you might want to leave that, right? The return to sender. And then I think there might be some elements, again, I named some positive intentions that I think kind of got lost along the way with some of the ways that our nonprofits are today. So there might be still pieces that you want, that you love, that you want to keep. I think you should get to do that. And then with the things that you want to love, I think there needs to be some experimentation, right? I think this is the opportunity for, again, for you to kind of use the three elements in the playground around the theme, like what are some different ways to communicate, different ways to understand, different ways to internalize information. We have the overalls. It's like, okay, what are some of how are you showing up? Literally with your body, right? What are you putting on your person? What's the energy you're bringing along? And then with the water, like, okay, how are we flowing? How are we meeting the moment in some ways instead of kind of fighting against what is? And so I invite you to go on an adventure, like start playing with some of the new items, and maybe there's some old ones that are still useful to you, and kind of make sense to see what could be here, right? And so I want to offer like a real practical example. It might be that maybe you are really gravitating towards like that water example, and you really want to have deeper relationships with your coworkers. Maybe set up some one-on-ones like my client has done. Maybe you want to make a point that like when you show up to the office, you want to have like rapport, relationship check-in, maintenance kinds of things, 30 minutes at the beginning of the day. Like there's ways in which we can kind of construct our days to make more of the kind of ways of being we want to have to be in our workday. If that feels hard to you, we should talk. Let's talk about it. Because it's possible. And I think the last and the most important piece of this process is the yay, right? I really think it's important for us to celebrate. I think if we don't celebrate, then we don't get to integrate. I think there's lots of times that we like try a whole bunch of shit. We might evaluate, but there's no recognition, right? There's no celebration around like, wow, I tried something and it fucking worked out. Or I tried something and it did not work out. The race to this side job, yeah. Thank you, Betsy. Because I think that piece around making sure that the things that we're learning as we're trying the different things that we want to do in our organizations, in our lives, we really need to celebrate those moments, right? Because then I think that just solidifies those things in your mind in a much different way than it was like, oh, I tried something and it was fine. Was it fine? Like, what was the end of that? I'm just such a proponent of celebration, and so I want to encourage you to make sure that is not a thing that you miss as you are evaluating like, how did it feel to try this new thing? How did it feel to continue to do the old thing? What facts, what information, what new data do I have after trying out this thing? What worked and what didn't work? I think that piece is really important.